recording will then be on the AHRC YouTube site. Can I ask that all microphones are muted if you're not speaking, if you're not presenting or asking a question? Can I ask people who want to ask questions after the presentations that they raise their hand or they put questions in the chat, and we will try and answer those. There should be in the chat a link to the Padlet, and Padlet is going to remain active after the event so that people can refer to it and add to it, and it is set up so that we can capture all sorts of questions and comments and resources that people might have in relation to this. So we are going to have, I'm going to hand over in a minute to Paris Seeger from the AHRC, who's the Senior Investment Manager, just to give a brief introduction to the IAA. Then we are going to have three different panels. Panel one is going to have two speakers, panel two, three speakers, panel three has two speakers. The format, and we're going to have quite strict timings on this, the format is that each presenter will speak for 5 minutes, and then there will be 10 minutes or so of questions afterwards. Speakers know that there are going to be signs that will warn you that you have 1 more minute remaining, and that you that your time is up. So if you can keep to that, that would be great. We will hear all speakers in each panel together, and then have questions at the end. And at the start of each panel, I will do a very quick introduction of the two or the three speakers that we have, and then they can follow one after the other. So without further ado, just to say welcome again, and to pass you over to Paris Seeger from the AHRC to give a brief introduction on the IAAs.
Thanks, James. Thank you. Hi, everyone. As James put it, I'm Paris Seeger. I'm a Senior Investment Manager within AHRC, and I look after the IAAs and the responsive mode portfolio. My colleague Victoria Bassett-Reid is also on the call today, and she also supports with that work. It's a pleasure to be here today to introduce you to the Impact Accelerator Accounts, the IAAs, and I will say that acronym quite a few times. So as a significant funding for initiatives by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. Since the harmonisation of the IAAs in 2022, UKRI has funded 137 IAAs, and AHRC has funded 32 absolutely fantastic IAAs across different institutions, across the whole of the devolved nations, in a hope to provide flexible funding to unlock potential impact of research. So I will keep this super short, because we're all here to listen to the amazing speakers and panels that we've got later on. But at the core, the IAAs are a funding mechanism that support ROs in accelerating the impact of their research outside of academia. This could include working with industry, government, public and private sector organisations and charities, just to name a few. The key aim of the IAAs is to foster innovation, encourage collaboration, and ensure that knowledge generated through the arts and humanities research reaches and benefits society. This aligns with the broader mission of AHRC, which promotes the research to address real-world challenges. Very, very quickly, sort of looking forward, UKRI and AHRC are committed to the IAAs and are currently planning the next phase of the IAAs, which will continue after these current cohort of awards end in March of 2026. And that is sort of my very, very quick summary. So I will pass back to James, but obviously happy to answer any questions that are going forward. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Paris. I'm sure there are burning questions about the dates of the application process for the next round of IAAs, but maybe that's for another time. We've recaptured 5 minutes, which is excellent. So I will start by introducing the first panel of speakers, and we've got two very exciting papers here. Our first speaker is Suwita Hani Randhawa, who is Senior Lecturer in Politics and International Relations at the University of West England in Bristol. The title of her talk is going to be A New Crime of Ecocide, Opportunities, Challenges and Implications for the UK. And then we will hear from Amanda Bayley, who's Professor of Music from Bath Spa University. And the title of her talk is Here Water. So Suwita, if you would like to kick things off, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for being here today. My name is Suwita, as already mentioned, and I'm a researcher that focuses on the historical origins of international crimes. Now, international crimes are a very interesting sort of phenomenon in world politics. And since the end of World War II, the international community has only recognized 4 acts as international crimes. And these 4 acts are genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and aggression. However, in recent times, there has been significant political movement on the recognition of a 5th international crime. And so this brings me to my current research, which focuses on ecocide. And could I get the next slide up, please? Spearheaded by a global social movement called Stop Ecocide International. They are leading the campaign to recognize a 5th international crime under international law. And in essence, my research at the moment is concentrating on analyzing the ongoing criminalization of ecocide in international law. As I kind of immersed myself into this research, I discovered that ecocide is gaining a lot of political traction within national legal systems, and indeed here in the UK. And next slide, please. So as part of my AHRC Impact Award, what I did was to host a workshop on ecocide that brought together some of the key external stakeholders currently involved in efforts to criminalize ecocide under UK law. Now, these included, firstly, Monica Lennon, who is introducing an ecocide bill in Scotland. Peers for the Planet, UK House of Lords Climate and Nature Action Group, who had introduced a private members bill on ecocide. But the workshop also brought together the global social movement Stop Ecocide International, along with members of the Green Party and the Labour Party. The purpose of the workshop was to discuss how we might achieve cross-party strategies to lobby the UK government to firstly introduce a domestic crime of ecocide in the UK, but secondly to also recognize an international crime of ecocide under international law. So this was a very useful workshop insofar as it brought all the key players in the UK context in a room for the first time to discuss this issue together. And next slide, please. And following on from this workshop, I've since been invited to join Monica Lennon's expert advisory group on her efforts in Scotland. I'm also going to be hosting a 2-day workshop that's going to bring practitioners and academics together to think about how we can use our research to help with ongoing political strategies in the UK. I'm also working on lobbying and petitioning Bristol City councillors to draft a local government motion on ecocide. And all of these are aimed at a more broader, ambitious goal, which is to eventually host an event on ecocide at the UK Parliament in order to be able to put together an expert report to lobby the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office to support the international campaign on recognizing ecocide as an international crime. I hope that's been 5 minutes. Thank you.
Great, that's even under 5 minutes. Thank you very much. That was excellent. And now to Amanda.
Thank you very much. There are 2 parts to Here Water because the project began in 2022 with the first phase, Building Environmental Empathy Through Deep Listening, funded by the Natural Environment Research Council. And the second phase was funded by an IAA to create a cross-disciplinary community and education resource. The real-world problem it addresses is multifaceted. It is to do with a lack of knowledge or understanding about climate change, the value of blue spaces, and teachers feeling ill-equipped to bring climate change into different areas of the curriculum. Climate change is one of the biggest crises facing our planet today, and research shows it is one of the most challenging areas to teach in the context of a restrictive educational system. Policy guidance is lacking and teachers are constrained by a knowledge-focused subject-based curriculum. So how can we help teachers improve their knowledge and confidence to develop eco-literacy skills in children? The second problem our work addresses is that child and adolescent mental health is in crisis. And a third problem is a lack of creativity in music education. My academic discipline is musicology or ethnomusicology. Ian Thornhill is a freshwater ecologist, and Kathy Hind, Matthew Alden, and Jill Parsons delivered the training for each phase of the project. Additional members of the team are Matt Baker in Wellbeing and Mel McCree in Forest School Education. Tom Walmsley from the Avon Schools Eco Network coordinated our work with local schools and teachers. Next slide, please. Listening in nature enabled us to develop connections between nature sounds, technology, science, creativity, and well-being. A suite of resources available on the project website include instruction packs as downloadable PDFs and video tutorials. The evaluation reported that staff felt able to take some of these activities forward, and the experiences with artist-led sessions enabled them to see new opportunities for creating new activities with their classes. We had several unique approaches to bring expertise together from different disciplines, to create a hydrophone package that was affordable for schools to make and is designed simple enough for children to build and use, to use sounds from nature as sources for creative, musical and artistic activities in the classroom. Building hydrophones to listen underwater and collect scientific data was a challenging technical activity that required focus and concentration, yet the payoff for children was enormous. One teacher commented, "The inclusion of tech attracted the interest of some children who engaged differently." Thematic analysis of observations and quotes from children and staff were used to triangulate with quantitative data in order to gauge changes in teachers' and children's perceptions of music and relations with the rest of nature. Next slide, please. The project afforded opportunities for both the children and staff to focus on their innate listening skills and its intrinsic benefits. In the survey, fewer children answered, "Yes, I am a good listener," than "I am a good music maker." That could be related to self-esteem or the value of listening as a skill, whether musical or transferable. Staff commented on how the listening exercises helped to support transferable skills, and listening was something that the children associated with technology. From a word count analysis of children's quotes, the water had the biggest impact in quiet listening exercises, demonstrating that the specific site of the stream was effective and a unique benefit of this project. From the survey data, using the Nature Connection Index, many children did not strongly feel part of nature. This wording is not a socio-cultural norm, although it is emerging as such and represents a cultural shift. This is an opportunity, therefore, to reflect on how we discuss our relationship with the rest of nature within education and culture. In the children's responses to their experiences, we can see clearly the way in which multisensory experience and close observation stimulates imaginative use of language, expression, and knowledge recall. Some teachers observed how much the children contributed, including some who are normally less engaged or quieter indoors in the classroom. Follow-up with teachers is being undertaken to see how the resources are being implemented and played with, and to assess the impact over time. The potential to collect scientific data, such as monitoring the health of aquatic habitats, will work with repeat visits, and the affordance of citizen science creates opportunities for future positive environmental impact. Dissemination of Here Water resources on our website aims to attract interest from future partners and will help teachers develop education for sustainable development, possibly as part of their CPD. We have submitted an article for the Teaching Times Journal. Another is in preparation for the Institute of Outdoor Learning, and I'm in discussion with founders for the Nature Premium campaign to see how we might work to support each other's work. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And impeccable timing from both our first speakers. Superb. Well, we've got about 10 minutes or so for questions now. So please raise your hand or pop questions in the chat. I can't see any hands going up. Ah, there we are. Well, maybe if there aren't any questions, maybe I could just pose a very sort of general, generic question. We have one. We have one in the chat. Did you find the use of website an effective means of dissemination?
If that's for me, is that it's too early to say really, because we're still in the process. It's another job really to then disseminate all the results of the work. So that's something we're still working on. So the website itself obviously is only there if people know about it, it's useful. So that's where we're still trying to find ways of getting it to the right places.
Okay, so my question was going to be a sort of generic one, which is about the way in which IAA funding has been instrumental to both of you in, you know, deepening and developing your impact. And probably in what ways has that been helpful?
Shall I go?
Go on, yeah.
Yeah, so in my case, I think the IAA funding was critical for enabling me to book a nice venue to bring speakers from overseas and to, in a sense, host a lovely event here in Bristol. It was also critical for us to be able to engage with a visual artist. So we had a visual artist on site who captured our discussions as and when we talked about our key questions. And I think one of the big image that she created from our workshop was kind of used in the promo material for this event. So it was really nice to see that kind of gaining traction from beyond. But the IAA made it just really possible to kind of put together an event on the day, to bring in speakers and to gather people around to be able to discuss some of the issues that I raised in my presentation.
Great, thank you. And Amanda?
Yes, for me, it was really crucial in being able to follow up on our original funding from NERC. And the feedback we'd got when we presented at an event, an AHRC event about that. So it enabled us to follow up and keep that momentum going. And it also enabled us to keep working with different disciplines and bring in different specialisms to guide it in the right directions to create a useful resource as a community resource and an education resource. So there were two ways that helped.
Great, thank you, thank you. Are there any? I can't see any other hands raised or any other messages in the chat. So why don't we move on and capture another sort of 5 minutes and move on to our second panel. And we have 3 speakers here. We have Alison, Professor of Sociology from the University of Plymouth, who's going to be talking to us about engaging young people with climate change. We have Stewart Barr, Professor of Geography from the University of Exeter. And Stewart is going to be talking to us about a project called Noticing the Future While We Still Can. And then our final speaker in this trio is Federico Lopez-Terra, who is Associate Professor in Modern Languages at Swansea University. And Federico is going to talk to us about climate action, emotions, voices, and bodies. So, Alison, would you like to start us off with your talk?
Thank you. Well, it follows on really nicely, I think, from Amanda's talk on Hear Water, because it's also focusing on education, but this time it's focusing particularly on secondary level education. And the issue that I'm addressing in my work is the vital issue of how to engage young people with climate change and equip them with the skills that they need for the future, given that they are the generation that are going to be most affected by climate change. And we know that there's a 200,000 workers, green workers skills gap. So we simply haven't got enough young people going into green careers. There's a lack of knowledge about what even constitutes a green career. And the other issue is that there is a lot of misinformation and deliberate disinformation about the solutions to climate change that is circulating, particularly on social media. And yet young people don't have the critical thinking skills and digital literacy often to navigate this, which is absolutely vital. So it's been fantastic to have received IAA funding to enable me to scale up the work that I'm doing and achieve more impact. The project actually began life as a pretty small University of Plymouth funded study where I was working with an artist and filmmaker and looking at ways of effectively engaging young people with the issues through an interactive game. And we were invited to present our findings at COP26 in Glasgow in 2021. And the IAA funding has enabled me to kind of build on that work. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, I'll outline some of the impact that's been achieved since COP26. So when we presented the Green Zone event at COP, this led to the Times Education supplement featuring the project and highlighting the need for schools to really improve climate change education because it tends to be siloed in geography and science at secondary level, and it's not embedded across the curriculum. So following this, I submitted evidence to a House of Lords inquiry on mobilising action on climate change and environment. And this was then cited in House of Lords report, which was great to see. And what the AHRC funding also enabled me to do is to really build on this and scale up much more. So I collaborated with the British Science Association and we carried out a nationwide survey of young people's experiences of climate education at secondary school and their attitudes towards climate change and how much they were relying on different sources of information, including social media. This was published in a report which we launched at the House of Lords, and Natalie Bennett, who's former leader of the Green Party, hosted the event, so it's fantastic to be able to do that. We brought together lots of relevant stakeholders here, including Peers for the Planet. Subsequently to this, the research has been cited in a post note on enabling green choices for net zero. And then I've also been doing some work with Local Sustainable South Hams, which has had benefits for community leaders and teachers through highlighting ways in which climate change teaching can be effective in actually engaging young people through the kind of pedagogy and approaches that are taken. So final slide, please. So what are the next steps? Well, I'm currently working with a museum in Plymouth, The Box, on a joint schools project, and we are assessing ways of engaging young people in this through an approach which is very localised. So it's drawing on the local case study of the National Marine Park in Plymouth, which young people, can identify with. It's meaningful to them. And we are especially interested in exploring the experiences of disadvantaged young people and how, this experience of taking part in these workshops can have an impact on this. And we're hoping to roll this out nationally. So there's a link to the BSA report there. And this week, the Academy of Social Sciences has just produced another report outlining 8 key challenges for the UK government, and the research is also mentioned there. So I'll stop there now because I think I'm running out of time.
Thanks very much, Alison. That was great. And next up is Stewart Barr from Exeter.
Yep, thanks very much. And as James said, I'm a human geographer from the University of Exeter, and one of my colleagues who I worked with on this project, Lewis Winks, is also here today, so he may well be able to contribute to some answers to questions later. This project really builds on the theme that Alison and also Amanda were talking about in relation to engaging young people with climate change. And the starting point for our project was some of the research that we'd undertaken in the past on education at a time of emergency, and also looking at art and agency within the context of climate change. And we were focused very much on trying to understand how we can empower young people to respond to their own climate anxieties, their eco-grief, and practically to campaigns like Fridays for the Future that started just before the COVID pandemic. So this was a project that was undertaken in collaboration with a local creative in West Somerset, Stacked Wonky, and also a long-standing relationship we've had with the Somerset Wildlife Trust. And my colleagues, Lewis and Harry, both did their PhDs at the University of Exeter and have been researchers here, and they've also set up their own environmental education consultancy, Lestari. So our project was effectively about trying to empower young people in a place-based setting who come from disadvantaged backgrounds in the context of the geographical area they were living in West Somerset, and was trying to empower them to take action on the climate. So next slide, please. So this was led by our partner Stacked Wonky, who had an existing relationship with a local school, and in particular 10 young people who they'd been engaging in creative activities. And those young people wanted to undertake some kind of environmental activism, and what Stacked Wonky did with Lewis and Harry on the project was to take them through a fairly structured programme of building confidence and considering what they would want to do. And what they ended up doing was this fascinating project called Down to Zero, which ran a year ago over about 6 weeks in the market town of Porlock in West Somerset. The young people went around the town and to the beach, collected 350 items of plastic waste. The AHRC funding paid for us to rent a shop for a couple of months. They decorated the shop with those plastic items, and then they invited people in during their Christmas shopping to come and have a conversation about climate change, environmental issues, plastics waste and pollution in general. And they offered them the opportunity to make one of 10 pledges, which might be things like using shops on the local high street, going to a repair cafe, using a zero waste shop, using a reusable cup, whatever it is. And I'm pleased to tell you that they had those 350 items of plastic waste. The shop was called Down to Zero. They actually got to -60 because there were 410 pledges in total. So it's really impressive what they managed to do. And they had a lot of local support from businesses. There was one company in Cornwall that gave them 250 reusable cups to give out to people who came into the shop. So this was a project really that was trying to demonstrate a structured process for engaging people to kind of tap and direct their enthusiasm, give them a level of confidence in working in a group, particularly as many of these young people came from disadvantaged backgrounds. And you can see some of the images on the right-hand side there from the project, and a quotation on the right-hand side from James, who was one of the group members. So the final slide, please. So in terms of next steps, there's kind of two things to say here. The first thing is that this is an ongoing group because the group was very successful in terms of how it worked. So they've done presentations at the Exmoor Festival over the summer. They've had a stall at World Ocean Day in Minehead in West Somerset, where they got another 100 pledges. They've been working with people in Minehead to encourage them to undertake environmentally friendly activities like beach cleans. And then the kind of practical output that we hope that's going to be really useful for place-based communities, creatives, as well as schools and so on. You see on the left-hand side here, which is the writing of a playbook, which we've almost finished and is now with our designer, which is really trying to provide an idea of how you go through this structured process of engaging, empowering, encouraging young people to take action on the climate and environment emergency. So we hope to be able to share that in the very near future. So I think my time is just about up, so I'll finish there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Stewart. And now our last speaker from Swansea University is Federico Lopez-Terra. So Federico, over to you.
Thank you very much. So let's go to Latin America for a second. Let's talk about Uruguay. Uruguay is deeply connected to water. In fact, the name of the country actually means river, but water also defines the country's identity and economy. Yet, in 2023, the Santa Lucia River, the one you see on the slide, the main water source for the capital city dried up, leaving the country in crisis. Uruguay, the country of water, was dying of thirst. This illustrates the urgent climate challenge we are addressing here, the impact of climate change understanding on vulnerable communities. But why couldn't we foresee such scenario? Our limited climate imagination prevents us from anticipating real-world climate threats, hindering our responses. Our work then inquires how we can shift climate narratives to foster collaboration between the global south and the global north, and how to promote real behavioral change. To bridge this divide between the north and the south, we've started conversations between communities in Uruguay and Wales, fostering mutual understanding to address shared climate issues. Montevideo and Swansea share strong links to the sea and what we could call a water identity. Collaborators from Uruguay included playwright and creative practitioner Marianela Morena, Divergente, a collective group of education practitioners focusing on diversity, gender, and equality, as well as multiple local artists. In turn, local organizations in South Wales included Volcano Theatre Swansea, as well as numerous NGOs and community groups that helped us recruit participants. Next slide, please. Our research connects marginalized communities in Uruguay and Wales facing climate-related water risk. Youth from unprivileged areas and asylum seekers in Wales, using storytelling and artistic collaboration to foster an individual and collective sense of agency. One participant actually noted, and I quote, "Stepping out of your comfort zone is always going to be scary, but it is very rewarding." Through trilingual workshops, English, Welsh, Spanish, led by Marianela Morena and Welsh Spanish facilitator Marilu Cervantes, participants created their own performance exploring climate action entitled Fly, the picture of the performance. You can see it on the slides. This approach provided a platform for ownership and expression, broadening perspective. Another participant shared, "This has been," and I quote, "an amazing opportunity to create a play together on climate action that let us see environmental issues from a new, different angle." Our underpinning multidisciplinary research, blending psychology, pedagogy, cultural studies, and the arts, produced original climate narratives collaboratively developed in Uruguay, which later inspired the theatre performance. The pictures you can see on the slides are the illustrations that accompanied the student stories produced collaboratively between students and local artists in Uruguay. Using a docudrama approach, participants express personal stories through voice and body, emphasizing cultural diversity and inclusivity. Feedback from the public highlighted the impact of alternative voices and storytelling in broadening perspectives. The project inspired education practitioners to embed climate issues in the curriculum and encourage artists, such as Morena, to work on projects surrounding the climate emergency. We believe this confirms the value of creative collaboration and diverse perspectives for inspiring new solutions to the climate crisis. Next and final slide, please. So what's next? Future directions. I'll summarize this in 4 items. The first one is research-led climate action partnerships. To ensure rigorous approaches to climate action, we are collaborating now with academic partners across the global north and south, including Universidad de la República, the national university in Uruguay, and Universidad de Grenoble in France, among other collaborators. Expanding the network, number 2. We are strengthening ties with societal partners, artists, and educational institutions, especially in the global south, for broader impact. New links with the Intendencia de Montevideo, which is Montevideo City Council, especially the Departments of Culture, Department of Gender and Equality, and Department of Rural Communities, will support this expansion. Number 3, expanding end beneficiaries and sustaining impact through time. Our next focus will be on rural women in the outskirts of Montevideo. This group has been identified at risk through collaborations with national authorities, the National University of Uruguay, and Montevideo City Council. Number 4, expanding creative work and reach. A successful bid for phase 2 fingers crossed, will enable us to produce, in partnership with Uruguay's National Theatre, Teatro Solís, a new theatre production to share these community stories, but on a national stage now and with professional means and resources, in addition to impact reports to guide public bodies such as Montevideo City Council and Uruguay's National Council of Education, SES, as well as other future initiatives. We're very much looking forward to this future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to all three of our speakers whose presentations spoke so well to each other. We've got quite a bit of time for questions now. So could you please raise your hands or put questions in the chat? And just to draw everyone's attention to the chat, there's quite a lot of information being sent back and forward. Penny Hay at Bath Spa has identified drawn everyone's attention to a project there around the Forest of Imagination. Alison has shared links to the paper that she talked about. And then we have a question from Sarah Alexander, which is a question to all of the projects which involve young people. How do you decide on which age group to target? So that's to all three speakers, I think. So specifically, why have you chosen, I suppose, why have you chosen secondary school aged kids, sort of 16 to 21-year-olds rather than early years?
If I can start perhaps from the While We Still Can project. I mean, I think there's two answers to that question. The kind of the first answer would be that we were in part responding to the literature that has shown us that there's a lot of concern about climate anxiety amongst teenagers in particular, and they were of course the group that were very involved in Fridays for the Future, which began in 2018. So practically from our kind of more activist project standpoint, that seemed to be the appropriate age group to work with. I think that there's a pragmatic issue with us that often happens in these IAAs, which is that in our case, the creative partner was already working with that age group, and therefore that kind of meant that it was relatively easy to recruit. So there's kind of two parts to that answer, I think, but certainly the element of kind of teenage climate anxiety, eco grief for us from the activist perspective seemed very important.
Thank you. Alison or Federico?
Well, it was very similar in my case as well, because I think one of the main reasons we decided to focus on this age group was to do with all the evidence around increasing climate anxiety amongst teenagers, but also with the British Science Association work. They already were working with young people in that age group, so practically it made sense to do that.
Great. And Federico?
Yeah, my answer is not going to be dissimilar. Yeah, we were working on climate emotion, so eco-anxiety was one of the key elements we wanted to explore. And that's seemed to be the right target group. Other than that, when we were working in Uruguay, we needed access to schools, and our partners are experts in secondary school education. So it seemed easier to access that group. Actually, for our second phase, we are targeting a different community of group of people based on the evidence that the new partners are giving us. So it's not going to be targeting that specific age group. But in terms of education, yeah, that was the reason why.
Great, thank you, all of you. And Penny Hay from Bath Spa has just put in the chat, for those of you who haven't seen it, a sort of differentiated set of projects at Bath. Playful Green Planet, that's aged at 0 to 11 years, and Young Green Creators, which is 18 to 25. We have another question in the chat, which is from Danny Payne, also at the University of Exeter. And it is directed to her colleague, Stewart. You mentioned your project was place-based, and the question is, Have you managed to scale this project up and broaden its reach in any way?
Okay, yeah, thanks. I'm going to ask my colleague Lewis, who's on the call, to come in just a minute. Hopefully he'll be able to do that because he's been working on the playbook output that I mentioned. So I think the generic perspective, that is always one of the challenges actually with the IAA model, which is it gives you this amazing opportunity to work usually within a particular context. In our context, it's a place-based context. Obviously, the kind of financial support available doesn't necessarily kind of enable you to follow on or to upscale within the project time frame. That's definitely our aspiration, which is why we were very keen to work with one of the wildlife trusts. And I don't know, Lewis, hopefully you can come in and say how we're trying to address that issue in the way that we're writing the playbook output, that we do want to go beyond the kind of West Somerset context. So I don't know if, Lewis, you'd be able to comment on that.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I think, yeah, I mean, it's very place-based work and has emerged from the way that Stacked Wonky work and the creative kind of dynamics between the young people and that kind of arts and cultural organisation that work in that locality. I think what we were interested in a way with the playbook is thinking about what are the kind of touchstones or hallmarks of that way of working, and how might that then be not necessarily upscaled, but kind of transplanted maybe into different settings. And I think one of the big barriers to a lot of mainstream environmental education work is the ability to access some of those more creative ways of working and to partner with creative organisations like Stacked Wonky. So we're hoping that the playbook will be one of the kind of multitude of ways that people might be inspired to access new ways of working, and particularly through things like the network of wildlife trusts. And so we're working closely with Somerset Wildlife Trust to try to capture some of the essence. But I think what we don't want to do is to suggest that you can replicate what has happened in Porlock elsewhere, because there's a whole set of emergent issues, challenges, opportunities that were very place-based. And yes, we're trying to tread that tightrope quite carefully.
Thanks, Lewis. That's great. And we have one more question in the chat from Yanwu. And the question is to Alison. It says, it's impressive and encouraging to see that you work with the British Science Association. How did you build this connection, and how did you manage to convince the scientists to work with artists? So, Alison.
Well, I was put in touch with the British Science Association through a policy engagement advisor that I was working with, and then had a series of meetings with them. I think it helped that I'd done the earlier project, and they were really, really interested in the work and wanted to collaborate. I think there might be a bit of confusion with the second question, because I was working with an artist and a filmmaker in the initial project, but then the one that was funded by the AHRC with the British Science Association didn't involve an artist. That was conducting a nationwide survey and holding a host of workshops with young people.
Great. Thank you, Alison. Can I also just draw everyone's attention to Alice's post in the chat that's encouraging everyone to go on to Padlet to share suggestions for themes for the next event, sharing publications, events, and resources. I know I see a lot of stuff being put in the chat. It'd be good to also be able to capture that on Padlet, I think, as well. Now, is there one final question, or shall we move on? I suppose we've still got a few minutes or so. I suppose I have a question that sort of sits across all three of these, which is another kind of sort of variation on the theme of why teenagers. I mean, what do you think are the most effective strategies for engaging with this particular age group? You know, and in some ways, is creativity, you know, one of the sort of best routes to sort of engage with them, which picks up also on something that Alison was talking about, and I saw Stewart nodding, and this was about the extent to which some of this work sits across the curriculum. So as a sort of integrated sort of pedagogical approach at a sort of school level. So Zara, that was several questions all in one, but I suppose it's kind of how do you engage the effectiveness of creativity, and I suppose the sort of like cross-curriculum approach to the kind of work.
I'm happy to start, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think one of the main things that we notice and realize is the importance of encouraging them, so giving them some sort of sense of agency, so listening to them. That's one of the main issues. They don't feel listened to, and then they don't speak, and they feel they don't have the right or the knowledge or the ability to present the problems or the point of views are not valued. So I think the first element in the creative workshops is to encourage them to start using their own voices and sharing and exchanging. I think for that is capital to work with education practitioners or artists with the experience and the right knowledge to do so, to encourage that. Actually, most of the time in our both workshops, the educational one and the performance one, was spent just encouraging them to know each other, start exchanging in the activity. In Wales, it was amazing to see how they were communicating trilingually, the fact that they were exploring the meaning of, for example, emotions, and sharing among them the differences, the different nuances between what is anxiety in Spanish, in Welsh, in English. What does that mean? What does that entail? And then started building the creative response from there. And I think the feedback supported that. They said it was very scary at the beginning, but very rewarding, and they learned a lot from each other. I think that's one of the things. And then in order to integrate that in the curriculum, for us, it's been working multidisciplinary. So we work with different disciplines, and that's how every discipline will bring, the outcomes of this and integrate it into their own expertise, so to speak, and their own discipline.
Great, thank you. Alison or Stewart, would you like to come back? Stewart, I think.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on that, the cross-curricular part, because I think that is really important, because the feedback that we've had from the young people in Porlock is that it's touching on so many different parts of both their formal curriculum, but also their personal development as individuals, and also group and team members. So that kind of holistic approach seems really useful. And I think that's what a creative approach, an arts-based approach can bring, and certainly that is something that can be delivered by, say, a creative agency that might be coming in from outside. It might be something that the kind of formal education structure, which is very dominated by academic subjects, might be quite challenging to deliver. So I think that's something that really came up for us. The other thing, I was just thinking back to a previous IAA that we were involved with, but this one was actually funded by the ESRC, but it's very similar to this, and I've put the main output from that, which was a handbook for our project called Education at a Time of Emergency. I've popped that in the Padlet. We worked with several Southwest environmental education charities that promoted outdoor learning, and I think that is something that can really bring out those connections across the curriculum. So traditionally, outdoor learning's been the kind of thing that people like me do as a geographer, but actually we met some really excellent educators who were able to tie together all sorts of subject interests within the outdoor setting. And what we recognized was that actually can, again, be quite challenging for teachers in a school environment who might be quite anxious about outdoor learning, both from a pedagogic but also a kind of risk management perspective. But I do think getting out, I was very inspired by one of the presenters kind of before our panel about the role of outdoor learning, and I think it was Amanda's talk on listening. So I think also the context in which it occurs can be quite important in literally getting students out of the classroom, and that's when you can see the connections coming together across different subject areas.
Great, thank you. Alison, do you have anything to to add?
I mean, I'd certainly agree with those comments. I think giving young people a sense of agency is absolutely crucial. And one of the things we found from our survey was that young people were saying that they were being taught mainly about the impacts of climate change, but they weren't actually being taught about the solutions, and therefore they were feeling very disempowered. So the more young people can feel a sense of agency. And another thing I think that through creative approaches, you engage with people's emotions more, and just giving people more and more facts about climate change won't necessarily change anything. So I think, you know, it's a very effective means of engaging young people with the issues. And I agree as well that, you know, outdoor learning and also anything that involves a kind of hands-on approach, you know, can be very useful in getting young people interested in the issues.
Great, thank you, Alison. And we have a question for Amanda actually in the chat. Amanda, if you're prepared to cross panels and answer this, I think it ties in very nicely with this session and also what Stewart was just saying. Why did you choose and what was your experience of working with a much younger age group? What were the outcomes of the project and what the and were the outcomes of the project what the teachers had anticipated?
Yeah, I actually sort of chose the age group was determined by Tom Walmsley, really, because I met him at a Communicate conference where we showcased some of the activities that we actually did with the children. And there were lots of NGOs there, all sorts of people from different organizations, and not just an academic conference. And there were lots of interesting contacts, and one of those was Tom Walmsley, who leads the Avon School Eco Network. And because he had immediate way of getting these sort of ideas over to a number of primary schools, I suppose that's how the emphasis on primary schools came about. Also because there's an immediate sort of, it seems to be a bit more, I don't know enough about the education, that's why we brought an education specialist into the IAA part of the project. But there's not so much flexibility once you get into the later, you know, obviously in the secondary school curriculum. And we wanted to start this integration of different areas of cross-disciplinary work in the earlier stage of the school. So I suppose that's a sort of summary of why that age group. And were the outcomes what the teachers had anticipated? I'm not sure how, possibly not, because they might have been sort of more familiar with some aspects of the project in terms of just being outdoors with the children, but not with the specifics of what we were doing, especially when it came to the specifics of building hydrophones and things. That's not something they would have done, let alone the children. So yeah, that in itself was certainly not what they'd anticipated, but some of the I think they were surprised, obviously, from one or two of the quotes I mentioned. I think some of the teachers were noticing how children were reacting differently once they were engaging in different aspects of the activities, because there were so many activities involved, and the teachers are then able to notice things, what activities brought different characters out of the children, I suppose.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for stepping back into the hot seat there. So we're maintaining our 5-minute buffer, and I think if there are no other questions, we'll move to our final two speakers, who are Hannah Pitt, who is Senior Lecturer in Environmental Geography in the School of Geography and Planning at Cardiff University. She's going to talk to us about where next for future farming skills. And our last speaker is Adrian Howkins, who is Reader in Environmental History at the University of Bristol. And Adrian is going to talk to us about applied environmental history of Dartmoor National Park. So I think Hannah is going to speak first.
Prada pawb, good to be with you, and I'm going to start by hopefully showing you the start of a short film. So over to the film. Grow
Is something that will always be needed. It will never go out of fashion.
Horticulture to me is nature. We are here to give to the land as the land gives to us. It's a part of life, it's not just a way of life.
Horticultural food production is about growing food for us and for our community in a way that we are happy with. And that means growing it in a way that is good for the land and good for nature. And that's why I think it's a really, really important job.
Great, thank you. We can stop it there. So I wanted to start with that because it really nicely sets up the problem that this project was focused on and how it clearly connects to the theme of today's session. So the issue that was at hand was really the need to grow more fruit and vegetables for all manner of reasons, which means therefore we need more skilled growers in the UK. But for a considerable period, the training infrastructure to develop those growers has been weak and reliant on informal practices of kind of goodwill exchanges of knowledge and expertise. And the sector has been marginalised from mainstream education. So it's kind of struggled to get its needs met by mainstream education provision. And it's lacked a coherent voice to convey what it needs. So the film that you just saw the start of was part of a project which this IAA grew out of, which included piloting of a training programme in agroecological growing. So having been involved in evaluating that training, we realised that there was good potential to build on it and use the experience from it, but wanted to find ways to kind of take the lessons forward. So hopefully we can see the second slide now. Great. So the IAA was bid for in partnership with the Land Workers Alliance and Social Farms and Gardens, but I've listed a number of partners on this slide just to highlight that across this activity, it's been very much part of working alongside others in this field, literally a field, I suppose, and working in quite a kind of responsive way to needs that emerged through involvement with these various organisations and the activities they were already working on in this area. So I always say that I'm very much not the expert. It's the people who are doing the training and have been through the training that have been the experts in this. But I suppose what I was able to bring was the capacity to convene conversations and bring people together, and also help them elaborate and work out what shared priorities might be. So the IAA supported a series of conversations of different groupings and some capacity from us as researchers to tease out those messages and the evidence. And one of the things we were asked to highlight today was what we maybe were able to do that others couldn't, or how we worked in a way that others weren't able to. And I think it's this capacity to convene conversations that was a really key part of it. And just an example of the kind of thing that resulted in was bringing together further education providers with people who train growers on their farms. Was able to kind of tackle some misconceptions. So, for example, a grower who had loads of training experience thought they weren't able to work with accredited training programs because they didn't themselves have a qualification. And we were quite quickly, through conversation, able to bust that myth for them. Other examples of the really nice tangible impacts was skilling the trainers, people with experience as trainees in food growing, and giving them some confidence to participate in events such as a panel at the Royal Welsh Agricultural Showground. Gave them a whole new range of skills and confidence. This particular person said they'd never been able to do public speaking before, so supporting them to speak in that kind of forum about their experiences not only made a really powerful message to the audience of policymakers, but actually gave them some confidence and new skills as well. And a really key other aspect of what we were able to bring to this sector and to the effort was the resource that we brought, both as researchers, but also having things like the support from the IAA fund to pay growers for their time to participate in these events and conversations, because they are very often working on very tight economic margins. So taking half a day out to come and talk to each other is really, really difficult for them. So being able to acknowledge their contribution was really valuable and meant that they could participate. And on to the final slide. So where have we got to? I think it's always the case with these projects that you don't really know at the end of the project. It's obviously the kind of almost the start of things in many ways. There's certainly a better understanding of priorities, and we were able to collate some of this into good practice, such as the report that's highlighted in the image on this slide, a set of case studies about working on accredited training provision for this sector. And I suppose a key outcome has been really being able to become established as a critical friend within the sector and somebody who is available to work on collaborations and advise. So, for example, most recently, I've been speaking to a project that's taken on a local authority-owned farm in Carmarthenshire, drawing on the experience and conversations we had with this project to help them work out how they might provide training opportunities at that farm site. And I'm pretty sure that's about time, so I will leave it there.
That's great. Thank you very much, Hannah. And moving on, our final speaker is Adrian Howkins from Bristol.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. So I thought it would be useful to start by just saying a little bit about how I came into this project, and then talk about the problem, what we've been doing, and future steps. So this project, actually on Exmoor National Park, not Dartmoor, began as a research, development, and engagement AHRC project on UK national parks more generally. Before moving to Bristol, I'd been working at Colorado State University in the US, where I was the Public Lands History Center, and we had strong connections to Rocky Mountain National Park, and we're actually using historical research to inform some of the work that park staff were doing there. So the plan with this project was to try and take some of those ideas and bring them into a UK context. On Exmoor, we started with Colbone Woods, which is actually the largest area of land owned by the national park. So that's on the north coast of Exmoor, very close to Porlock, actually, going back to previous talks this afternoon. But that was directed by the park staff. So we asked them where would be useful to have some more historical understanding. They pointed us to the woodland. We did some work there. And in fact, that is continuing and is an ongoing project. But through that work, there was a request for historical information and input for sort of applied environmental history to a DEFRA landscape recovery scheme, which is one of the new funding arrangements for agricultural support post-Brexit. It used to be called the higher tier, but essentially a number of landowners coming together to put in landscape recovery to recover the landscape. So when you look at this idea of recovery, there is a historical dimension to it. So the question is, when are we recovering the landscape to? I think this gives an opportunity for historians to engage. And our expertise is about gathering historical data from a wide range of places and archives, and trying to make sense of that. So there is plenty of data on Exmoor scattered around in archives, but these are not comprehensive, standardized, or chronologized. So that has been a large part of our work. Next slide, please. One thing I've learned before from working with scientists and policymakers is often about the way you present data. And one thing that we found is that maps and mapping and GIS, geographic information systems, offer a point of convergence. So one particularly satisfying element of this project has been historical mapping work that we have done. Initially, desk-based research, so using historical maps that we found in archives online through the historic environment record that Exmoor runs, and using these to identify landscape change over time to inform a landscape recovery process. So a sort of working idea of this is that it is the landscapes that have changed most recently, perhaps that are the easiest and most obvious to think about recovering back to something, some previous state. So we have done some work on finding these, putting them into chronological order, and we're starting to do some work on participatory mapping, which is really fun, essentially putting down a map of Exmoor onto the table in a farmhouse and getting farmers to talk to us about what has changed, what they would like to see in the future, and particular features on their farms they would like to retain. Final slide, please. So this is very much an ongoing project. I think working with something like the landscape recovery scheme, which is really in its first iteration, it's still being worked out as we speak, is a interesting sort of impact experience. So we will continue to do this working with the landowners and staff at Exmoor National Park. We're also conducting wider oral history interviews with farmers on the past, present, and future. And we have a wider online survey that will go out probably in the new year now to bring in other voices. So we want to extend this beyond simply landowners and farmers. And a big question for our work is, how do we scale up? I noticed this was a question that was asked earlier, but how do we scale up the insights from this work? We held a workshop in the summer as part of the RDE grant, bringing representatives, historians from all 15 UK national parks together. And we're incorporating some of the insights coming out of that workshop, but there's also, I think, an opportunity to take it the other way. So that's the work we're doing. Very happy to talk about any aspect of this project. This is just one part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adrian. So do we have questions for our two speakers, for Hannah and for Adrian? We have one from Lewis in the chat. Thanks, Adrian. Fascinating and essential stuff. Have you been in touch with the folk from Campaign for National Parks about this work?
Yeah, a really good practical question. We were in the initial stages of it, and I probably should, it's a good reminder to get back in touch and tell them what we've been up to in recent. So this really is this sort of pivot to the landscape recovery began early in the summer and came through the work that we were already doing in Colbone. So it's quite a interesting sort of recent innovation, but I think highlights the importance of building relationship with partners so that they recognize your expertise and can come to you when they're looking for something and know you might be able to help with that.
Great. And we actually have a hand up. Alex Langlands.
Hello. Yeah, sorry, I was just making a bit of a meal of trying to type out my question. I thought I might as well just ask it. A question for Adrian now. I was really interested in the participatory mapping. And I just wanted to ask whether you had a sort of methodology for that, or whether you had a sort of measurable outcome, whether it was a sort of like I don't know, a deep mapping exercise, or there was something that was a kind of recordable sort of data output there.
A really good question. So one of the postdoc research associates on the project, his PhD had been in the Ethiopian highlands, and I think a lot of the participatory mapping work is actually coming out of Africa, other parts of the world, and it's interesting to be bringing it back into a context like a UK national park. We're at the sort of still we're doing pilots, and we've started the gathering the data, but it's very much driven by what we're finding. The goal of the analysis is to think about both past, present, and future. And I think one of the things that we're very much hoping is that we can identify certain features that are common among different landowners, but also from people outside, the particularly valuable resources to maybe focus landscape recovery or preservation efforts on. So looking, to sort of, we're using the maps to tell stories and sort of come out of that, but there's also going to be, I think, some tangible places and sort of things that we can point to where there are overlapping points of convergence between different users that would really benefit from conservation work.
Thank you for your question, Alex, and great answer, Adrian. There's a question in the chat from Juliet Lennox for Hannah. How did you navigate multiple approaches to farming education? For example, organic, non-organic, no dig, etc.
Yeah, great question. So we weren't focused on any particular, I guess, subject content of the training. It was more about looking at the infrastructure and enablers which would support growers to be able to share the knowledge which is important to them. So, for example, one of the things we were able to do was look at accredited provision like the City and Guilds programme, which has got established curricula for things like horticulture, and to see how much flexibility there is to be able to incorporate training in things like no-dig, so the more kind of organic or less conventional practices. And one of the things that we could do by looking at some of the colleges and what they are teaching, to see how they're able to flex what's already in established curricula, which therefore come with kind of all the infrastructure and funding that comes with things like apprenticeships, and be able to flex that to embrace a range of those types of farming approaches. So we were focusing, I guess, on the infrastructure and then looking for opportunities for flexibility within that.
Great, thank you. We have a couple more questions in the chat. One from Lorraine Fairbanks, University of Bristol. And Lorraine's question is, what are you all feeling about commercialization as a means to scaling up this fantastic activity?
That may be a leading question for me because I've been working with Lorraine around this this project. But I think there's definitely potential. And for example, we had some really interesting conversations with the Ordnance Survey commercialization department and thinking about the historical maps and what we can do with those. So I think there's potential to use this in different ways. With just thinking about kind of the commercialization work, is it offers a new perspective. So you start to see things for impact work from differently and I think more deeply just by doing that and seeing a different perspective. So it's been a really helpful process to think about and go through. So yeah, thank you, Lorraine.
If that was a planted question for you, I'm not sure I necessarily want to pass it on to Hannah. Hannah, do you have any sort of thoughts on commercialization for your work?
So I don't know, I'm probably not very popular within my institution because I'm generally looking not to how we can kind of commercialize things that the university might make money, but the very opposite, and trying to, I guess, lever the university's resources to benefit third sector and community partners in particular. So things like being able to reward expert growers for their input to projects like this is a really good example of that, I think.
Thank you. And we have another question in the chat from Alice from the AHRC. And this is open to any of our speakers across our three panels. The question is, most of the projects today involve partners. What skills do you think you've gained from working with these partners, and do you have any tips? So tips for partnership working.
I mean, I'm happy to start off, but I guess following on from what I just said, which is, I guess, the key thing I've tried to develop is listening to what others are saying is important to them and what they would like to see happen, and trying to find ways to respond to that. So comes with, I guess, flexibility and not necessarily having a fixed view of what I personally might want out of the cooperation, but trying to be responsive. And then I guess what I think we can bring as academics sometimes can be useful is being regarded as almost a slightly neutral party, particularly when you're bringing different groups together, and being able therefore to broker conversations that might be slightly awkward or tricky, because you're not seen as having a particular vested interest in them. And one of the examples that I think highlights what we can kind of offer is I was invited to give evidence at a parliamentary inquiry on land-based careers on the back of submitting written evidence. And I know some of the partners that I've mentioned also submitted written evidence and weren't invited to speak. And I wonder if it's because the kind of credibility or regard that you have as an academic, rather than being seen as a slightly hippie vegetable grower, might mean that we get invited into spaces that they wouldn't otherwise.
Anyone else want to chip in on this?
I think a reflection on my work with Exmoor is just how stretched many other sort of public services are, and the need. So trying to do something innovative and use historical research to inform landscape recovery is exciting from an academic perspective, but in terms of a sort of day-to-day, we need to get this done. We need to bring landowners together for the first time to do something different. Do we actually have time for the sort of time and risk to do something new? And there was definitely an openness to that, but I think being aware that you are sort of asking quite a lot of partners sometimes in terms of time and the projects that they're working on, and how they are judged by the results of that. And we're probably using quite a different set of rewards and so on. I came away very much in awe of the sort of the way that particularly park staff balance conflicting interests across the Exmoor National Park. And I think we often don't realize as academics quite how sort of these social dynamics and actually real world impacts of that can be. So just, yeah, came away with a lot of respect for the work that they do.
Yes, I was just going to add, I think that flexibility is very important, because in the IA projects I've been involved with, you might specify a certain number of hours that a partner might be able to give in kind, but actually events happen. Individuals that you've cultivated a relationship with leave, you need to start a new relationship. A new manager might see the relationship you're going to have as different. And I think, yeah, probably the skills that Lewis, Harry and I have gained is being able to understand the changing demands, as Adrian was saying, for partners, and being able to change that quickly and being able to respond and not putting too much pressure on a partner, and understanding, certainly during the pandemic when we had one IAA, actually we had to pause the project because our partners may have been on furlough, they may have been directed to different business activities. So that flexibility is important. And the second thing I was reflecting on was very often you end up as an academic researcher being a bit of a curator, because if you have multiple partners involved, you are, even if you weren't intending to, you're beginning to cultivate a network. So you're curating something new, and that comes with lots of benefits for the project. It also comes with some risks, because there ultimately is an exit that has to happen when the project ends. There may not be the funding to continue the intensity of the relationship that you have with the partner. So therefore, managing expectations at the very beginning about what this IAA thing is, and how long it will last, and what we can realistically deliver as academics, I think is another useful skill we've developed over the years.
I might just add something to that. I agree totally with what Stewart just articulated really well about flexibility, and Hannah too, and also patience with working with partners, because we started out hoping and planning to work with more teachers as part of their continuing professional development. But we couldn't get as many teachers to be free at the same time, even though we thought we could at the beginning on the half days or whatever to do that. So we then had to adapt and to change the timing as well, because we were also constrained by when the sounds were going to be made, the sounds were going to be underwater in terms of the seasonal changes of that. So we had different things to weigh up and to be adaptable to. And therefore we ended up doing it with fewer teachers, and also delivering it to the children at the same time in parallel. So there were just changes and we adapted to that.
Great. We have another question in the chat from Lisa. And this is a question for all speakers, but particularly those who worked with children or young people. And the question is about evaluation strategies. Did you find any innovative ways of evaluating your projects and gathering evidence of impact beyond standard interviews, surveys, and focus groups? So it's a question about innovative forms of evaluation for young people and children.
Can I say something?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating question, Lisa, actually. And we were concerned about the sort of same things, especially because evidence showed that students normally, if you ask, if you present them with surveys, they will mostly respond what they think it is expected from them. So a survey at the beginning, a survey at the end, after showing them, I don't know, climate change narratives, doesn't necessarily mean that the behavior of the understanding has changed, but that they understand that they need to respond differently the second time round. So in order to mitigate that, what we do, or we have started doing, is analyzing their own narratives, because they are producing, every time they are producing their own artistic output. What we do is close readings, and that's where we work with literary and cultural scholars. We've developed narrative categories, for example, and after they develop their own stories, we'll go back and analyze them and try to match them, what they are doing, what they are saying. That's one way of checking whether the responses to the surveys are honest responses, and this, if that's, narrative understanding has really changed. And the second one is more linked to behavioral change. What we do is follow-up activities in which we don't necessarily tell students that we're working with them for a project. It's just within the curriculum, after a couple of months, they'll do an activity and they'll ask to approach a different issue, climate-related issue, in some sort of way, collaboratively, and then we analyze that to see if, first of all, whether the change that has happened after workshops has been sustained, or if there are any changes to that. And I think those are, I don't know if they are very original, but those are different ways of analyzing and assessing the impact that you have on these groups.
Would anyone else like to come in on that? Stewart.
I was just going to say, yes, I was reflecting on the question, the kind of the standard tools that you might use, interviews and focus groups and so on, because we, for our project, we did do evaluation that did involve a form of interview and did involve a form of focus group. And I was thinking about how I think that did work for us, because Lewis and Harry had a very kind of close relationship with the group over a very long period of time, kind of about a year. And so I think that the trust had been built up there, and actually a lot of those evaluative conversations were partly led by the creative partner, Stacked Wonky. And I attended one of those sessions. Was kind of, we went out for lunch and it was a conversation rather than a structured focus group. And so I think partly the answer is, if you are going to use the more standard methods, it will depend on whether you've been able to cultivate a trusted relationship with the young people, and whether it's occurring in a kind of a setting where they're comfortable, rather than kind of taking somebody out and interviewing them in a kind of quite sterile space and so on, which is what we might be used to. So I think it sometimes depends, and sometimes those more conventional methods can be appropriate if you've got that kind of quite deep relationship with a group of young people.
Great. Would anyone else like to come in on that, or?
I was just going to say, in the current project that I'm involved in, we're exploring using mood boards, which I think is similar to what Federico was talking about. And we're also speaking to teachers as well about their perceptions concerning how young people have found the sessions and the kind of sort of impact that it's had on them.
Great. Okay, is there one final question from the room or in the chat? No, so we are at 5 to 3, so we'll end a little bit early. And just to thank our speakers for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wonderful rich papers. And I think that this really worked brilliantly as a theme to demonstrate the vitality of the Impact Accelerator accounts for this kind of work. To thank the organisers for the event, and to thank our colleagues at the AHRC for coming along and for facilitating this. And hopefully there'll be opportunity for us all to meet again, and hopefully Padlet will have all sorts of insights into what we should do next. But meanwhile, thank you all for coming, and hope you found this really useful.